Welcome back to Two Who's Review. I'm Alex.
I'm Fitz.
And today we are continuing Season 3 of Doctor Who by looking at the Shakespeare Code. It's the first historical episode of this season, and the first with a historical figure. And it's an interesting one.
Yeah.
I don't normally do this, but I'm actually going to read out, word for word, a review of this episode from the timescales, because it pretty much perfectly summarizes my feelings about this story.
Sure.
I would wait to the end here, but I feel like I should do it off the bat, just to set the tone.
Yeah. Good.
This episode feels like it was written by two different people. On the one hand, someone who understands Shakespeare as the populist playwright he was, and who clearly wanted to do a clever dive into his history and some of the big mysteries around him. And on the other, someone who's never picked up a play by the bard in his life, and so has opted to harp on about the power of words and forcibly drop every line you can find on page 1 of Google. The concept is cool. The Carrier Knights are a neat take on witchcraft, although it's never explained why one rode a broom when they can clearly just float. Love's Labour's one, Shakespeare's loss of his son, and the unusual geometry of the globe are all used well, and there's clearly a lot of knowledge being written into this version of Shakespeare, with his implied bisexuality and avoidance and subversion of most of the erroneous stereotypes made about him. There's also the odd good scene here and there, particularly when Ten confronts Lilith. Unfortunately, besides that, there's just so much wrong here. Martha's treated horribly. She doesn't get to figure out what happened to Linley. Instead, Ten just magically knows. He puts her down to pine about Rose in a substance-less moment that doesn't advance his grief arc, and she straight up gets knocked out during what could have been a key character moment, because I suppose Roberts didn't feel like having to write her. This is without even mentioning the way white and not visibly non-human Ten brushes off a very serious question about slavery, and also sits back and lets Shakespeare throw casually racist comments at her all to make a snide comment about political correctness. Interesting that an episode about the power of words doesn't address the impact of casually racist language. There's also lots of big plot holes to poke here. The Carrier Knights speak florid prose and use words as a scientific unit, yet the spell to open the portal is blunt and uses numeric coordinates. How did Shakespeare break the psychic paper, which AOG established requires psychic abilities to do, and work out Martha's from the future? But no, all this is in service of Roberts being able to show us he's a genius, because otherwise all we'd have is Ten just telling us over and over and over. And of course, there's the finale where Shakespeare is once again blindly jerked off. If his words sway public opinion like you've been setting up, why not have the finale be based around some kind of mind control so his character as the popular writer can actually be used? Oh wait, Roberts wanted to drop a second hand-fisted Harry Potter reference. Anyway, I've rattled on long enough. The bones of this story are really solid, but ultimately shattered by passionless execution and a groan-worthy finale. Shakespeare and Martha deserve so much better. I'm gonna go watch 12 Punch Sutcliffe now.
I was gonna bring that up with 12, actually. Yeah, doesn't he, punch a racist in the face?
Does. He punches a racist in the face without hesitation.
Yeah.
Which is such a great moment.
Yeah.
But we'll get to there way on down the line. That's all, to me, that's like a perfect summary of this episode. Like, I have no notes about that review. It's pretty much perfect. Nothing about that is something I disagree with.
Yeah. No, honestly, that's pretty spot on. I hadn't thought that much about some of the plot holes. I mean, maybe they were sort of simmering in the very back of my mind, but I hadn't consciously sort of connected the dots. But that all does make sense. Yeah, why would they be using numbers if it's words? Like, if you're going to go with weird, supernatural things, scientific explanation, it's better to commit. So why are they... Like, the Doctor specifically says, you use numbers in mathematics, so why are the Carrier Knights using mathematics? Because the fact that they speak the words and that makes things happen, that's not really the unique part. It's the words themselves that that's the unique conceit that is in this story. So why are they bothering with numbers, especially with that the climax where Shakespeare comes up with new words to defeat them, and he just says numbers. Like, the Doctor just
gives him the coordinates.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if you could even argue that the whole 14 thing is that still relying on mathematics too much. I mean,
maybe.
that could work, but it's not it's not really fitted together very well, is it?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the 14 sides of the globe amplifying the words, because that is just like a form of like it's powering the words up. It's not like replacing the words.
Yeah,
That
I
I can
guess
get
so.
away with. And that side of things where they actually like incorporate a lot of the Shakespeare mystery stuff is actually some of the really solid parts of the story. But
Oh, yeah.
and I think we'll expand upon some of the finer points in that review as we dive in a bit deeper.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, do you have anything to add to that summary before we do the timescales, rankings, and numbers?
I think that's pretty good. I mean, that summary covered basically my thoughts on the story and a couple of other things I hadn't quite thought about. I do, and we'll obviously get into this in more detail. I do want to reiterate what the guy said about the really shitty characterizations that we're presented with for sort of the Doctor and Martha. Really, the fact that well, okay, like first off, the Doctor's just being a bit of an asshole really throughout this story, and there's not really any. Like, you could try and justify it and say, oh, he's still grieving over Rose, but one, that's not really a great justification. Two,
No.
even if it was some justification, it doesn't seem like something the Doctor would, take out on other people like that. And three, even if they were trying to incorporate it into a bigger, grief arc, it, one, doesn't look great, on its own in this episode, and as that reviewer pointed out, and you can attest to this greater than I can, but it doesn't seem to get expanded on that much in this season arc anyway. So, yeah,
No, it
we'll get
doesn't. And
yeah,
even just for this episode alone, it's a scene that sticks out like a sore thumb. And like, there's never a scene later on where the Doctor's like, I don't think there's ever a moment in this entire season, in fact, where the Doctor like actively like not maybe not apologize. Not he should apologize first of all, but
yeah,
he doesn't. But also there's never a moment where he's like he acknowledges Martha as like even just an equal to Rose. Like there is a point where eventually he revokes her temporary companion status, but that's about it. And like I said, it's such a shame that so much of Martha in this season is just about being someone that the Doctor can look at and go, "You're not Rose."
yeah. I mean, well, it kind of sort of goes back to what you said about Martha being an underrated companion, and I can certainly agree with that, but I think part of the issue is that the series seems to treat her as an underrated companion. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like they
yeah,
seem to,
definitely.
and by the way, it wasn't even just a single moment in this story. There were a number of them. I can't remember each one exactly, but a number of them where the Doctor is rude and dismissive and mean, and like that stuff is bad enough when we see it in Classic Who. And by the way, we'll be getting on to
Yeah,
similar topics with the Damons, but um like it's and the fact that stuff like that happens in Classic Who with the, let's be pretty honest, some of the undercurrents of sexism that Classic Who gets accused of, not without not without reason. Um, it's it like just because it happens in the classic series doesn't mean it's good, and it doesn't mean that we should just accept it. Um, but by that token, it is at least just as bad in this story. The fact, I mean, I don't know if well, I don't know, maybe if, I'm not sure if I could make this call definitively, but if there's an undercurrent of sexism to the way the Doctor's treating Martha, I'm not sure if it's more pronounced than it is in the classic series, but at the very least, the fact that the Doctor's being this shitty to Martha generally, I just think it did, I mean, was that really necessary?
well,
Like, what are we saying with that?
even just personally, I take offense at the fact that the reason that exchange happened in the first place is that he is for some reason under the impression that Rose would know what to do in this moment, when in reality, what she would do in this moment is have been already kidnapped by this point and be something for the Doctor to save.
Yeah,
He's
well,
got he's got a bit of the rose tinted glass. He's got the graduation goggles on regarding Rose.
rose tinted glasses.
Rose
Okay,
tinted
but
glasses. Yeah, I didn't
yeah,
even
but I
notice
mean,
that.
anyway,
This
but
this
yeah, like,
whole I think
and
this
it's
whole era has rose tinted glasses. In fairness,
well,
like
it's not even again, it's not even just one moment for me. There are a number of moments where the Doctor's just straight up shitty to Martha, and I just think, is this really what we're doing here? Like, how is this helping anything. I was wondering when you were going to bring up the, Rose would know what to do, because I thought, I'm sure Cuff would have some feelings about that
There's every
bit of
possibility
dialogue.
that, look, there's every possibility this could be one of the handful of episodes in which Rose does ask the right question in the right moment to spur something out of the Doctor.
Mm.
But I wouldn't hold my breath. In fact, this is actually the first time in the entirety of Revival Who where a single companion has gone two entire stories back to back without being captured or trapped.
And
without having to be something for the Doctor to save. This is the first time it's
Yeah,
ever happened in Revival Who. I just want to highlight that because next episode is Gridlock, and that is one which the story is facilitated by Martha getting captured. So, it's not.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that it's completely immune. And Martha, every single companion at some point will need to be rescued by the Doctor.
Yeah,
That's just a given. But
I think
like,
that's sort of part of the formula to a
yeah,
certain extent.
exactly. But like already, Martha has a significantly better average than Rose does. So I don't want to hear any of this. Like, oh, it's a shame I've only got this useless sack of potatoes, Martha here. Because if I had Rose, I'd be all over this, and she'd be doing exactly what she needs to. Shut up, jerk ass Doctor. People call it's like how people call like early season Homer Simpson, or I think it's late season, I forget. But there's a certain era of Simpsons which is known as jerk ass Homer because he's just unapologetically mean to Bart and Marge and Lisa and everyone around him, and there's no redeeming qualities like there is in the middle season where he's like, and there's so we get kind of jerk ass Doctor here, and I think that's what I'm going to be tracking for this season is how jerk ass he gets, and whether this is a high point or like where it peters out.
I mean, I'm not even against the Doctor being a bit of a selfish jerk, because I think to an extent that's part of their personality. But if you're going to do that, you want to have some level of criticism towards it, even within the story themselves. You want to have maybe a confrontation moment with a companion, saying, "Hey, you've been really shitty to me. Can we, take a step back here?" Or some way to be critical of that nastiness. And I know I made the comparison to the Damons here, but if you go back to John Pertwee, there were some shitty ways that he treated the companions. And again, it's not that it happened in the classic series, that doesn't make it okay, but it's still a little bit unpleasant to see that carried on in this story.
And we do get that moment in the series finale, that moment where Martha does confront the Doctor about it. But that's still like 12 episodes of uncomfortable that we have to sit through to get to that point. And I think the question will be, was it worth it? I don't know. We'll figure that out, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think
the feeling is no, but
I guess we'll wait and see. You can attest to that greater than I can. It's been ages since I've seen this season all the way through. But the thing is, though, and certainly based on what you've said, even if it's one moment that sort of attempts to remedy this situation, if you're going to only address that in one moment, it better be like a really big, well, maybe not a big or melodramatic, but like an intense confrontation. And based on what you're saying, it's not really intense enough or effective enough to sort of justify 12 episodes of the Doctor being a jerk.
See, it's difficult. From memory, what I like about the conversation from memory is that like it is a very one-sided conversation. It's basically like Martha describing what she's been through, and the Doctor basically unable to comment because he's like feeling that, oh shit, I've been bad. So I think in that sense, it plays that conversation well. But I think that I don't know. From memory, I don't think it's like she spends a huge part of the conversation relating it back to a friend of hers she had that was in a similar spot, and I think maybe I don't know. We're not. We'll figure that out.
Yeah, we will.
But for now, the Shakespeare Code on timescales out of 206 votes has an average rating of 6.6. I don't know.
I mean, yeah,
maybe a bit lower, but I don't know.
I mean, there are some, well, kind of like that review said, there are some elements that work, but when you put it all together, I don't even know if it's necessary that it's like a bang-on average episode. There's just very uneven elements to it that are hard to sort of stomach overall, I guess. So
Yeah,
I don't know.
it's just kind of like I don't know. It feels like an episode where like you can clearly see what the intent was, like
Mm,
the like what they're trying to do. I actually quite like how they incorporate the Carianites in the time, like, and especially like
mm.
using this whole like the through line makes sense, right? You got witches, spells, spell casting, words, power of words, Shakespeare.
Yeah, sure. Now that makes sense. Thematically, it's
Yeah,
quite an interesting episode.
you can absolutely follow that through line, but
Sure.
with the amount that they harp on about the power of words, like you got to wonder like what is the power of words, you know? And I
Yeah.
don't think the episode ever goes that far. All it does is say there's power in words, and Shakespeare had the best words. It's like, hey, well, no, tell me
Yeah.
what the power of words is. If you're gonna harp on about it this much, like actually,
Mm.
like do something with it. Tell me how and why words hold so much power. Not in terms of the Carianites and the science behind it, but what the message is. And
Yeah, the human impact.
the human impact, exactly. Like, there's no like. I think this episode feels a lot like a Chibnall era script in that it is all on the surface, right? There aren't really
Mm.
any deeper themes to dig at, and when you do dig deeper, you notice really unpleasant stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's some moments where it gets, a bit deeper than surface deep, but it's never really explored properly. There's an example of this. I'll get to it in a little bit, but basically, yeah, I think maybe there are moments like when we're talking about, Shakespeare's grief, that's getting a little deeper, but even then, that's not really the main point of the episode. Certainly, and I suspect you'll agree here, the thematic concerns of, the power of words, it is a bit of a waste of potential. There's not really like great, like cool concept, but it's not really explored in any super interesting or effective way. Like there's no talk of how, inspiring, Shakespeare's words were, or how thematically complex his
Yeah,
writing was,
well,
and how that shapes public opinion even.
yeah, exactly. Like you compare this to something like Unquiet Dead,
Mm,
which is a very easy comparison to make. And
mm,
in that story, like it might not be very thematically rich in and of itself. Like there are deeper discussions to be had about organ donation and that kind of stuff.
yeah.
But even like concerning the focal historical figure of both episodes, Unquiet Dead is a story about Charles Dickens opening his eyes to what else could be possible in the world and not being so close minded anymore. Shakespeare
Mm.
Code is a story where Shakespeare gets told over and over again that he's brilliant.
And also describes himself as a genius.
Well,
So
yes.
yeah, when you think about it, he doesn't really have much of a character arc, which is a bit frustrating because I think like you want to see sort of how the companions progress. I mean, I think I mentioned this before in the that very good video essay, Doctor Who versus Women. Thank you again, Hadley, for bringing me onto that. There's a bit where it talks about how the Doctor, especially in the classic series, is a bit static. So it's more about how they impact the people around them, so the companions and the side characters.
Yeah.
Well, there was potential here, I guess, for showing the Doctor's impact on Shakespeare, but isn't a lot of it. And
No.
because of that, his character arc, well, there just really isn't much of a one. He starts off kind of an arrogant, slightly humorous jerk. He saves the day and ends as a kind of arrogant, slightly humorous jerk, I suppose. It doesn't
Yeah.
really. And you'd think, it's kind of funny, I guess, that they're puncturing this, high and mighty view of Shakespeare by showing him to be,
just another guy.
Yeah, which is good, but you'd want something more than that, yeah? You'd want, again, a character arc or more depth, but they're not really offering much here.
Yeah, well, and to that effect, to that end as well, like when there's nothing deeper in terms of character or theme, all that's left is plot, right? And so the easiest way to describe this story, looking at it through that lens, is just a bit of fun, right? Like not a lot to say, not a lot to like speak of in terms of exploring its characters. So it's designed, I think, to be a fun sci-fi romp with witches, right? And yet, I don't think a lot of this story is particularly fun because like 90% of it is the characters just talking to each other, and they talk to Peter Street, they talk to Shakespeare, they talk to the other person, they talk to Lilith, and not a lot actually happens. And it's like I think that's a huge part of the problem in this episode is that a lot of it is very static. Now, I don't have a problem with lengthy conversations in general. That's my bread and butter as a writer, is writing conversations. But like a lot of like it's just like 5 different conversations with Shakespeare flirting with Martha, 3 different conversations about how Shakespeare's genius is integral, 3 different conversations about the Carrier Knights, and
then one conversation with Lilith and the Doctor about Rose, which I see what you mean. I think your point seems to be that if you're going to have a story largely told through dialogue, they need to have a strong sense of purpose and dramatic weight to them. And this one doesn't seem to.
Yeah, well, I think also it's like if 90% of your story is going to be dialogue, it needs to actually flow as dialogue. Like you can't have the problem where if I take particular moments, like not all of them obviously, but if I take particular moments and swap them around in the script, nothing changes. That's not going to work for a story like this because it's going to seem stagnant. And I think we'll look at the 6.5 for plot on the timescales. And I think a huge part of the reason why it is a sort of underrated story in terms of plot is, well, it's, when you boil it down, a pretty standard invasion story starring a group of aliens that are just characterized as evil. Nothing much deeper there. But also, like, as you mentioned, none of the characters are changed by the end of the story. Shakespeare himself is pretty much unchanged throughout the whole thing. It's not a story that has any weight to future events in terms of the overall series arc. And it's also just not a particularly interesting one to watch because, like, until the Carrier Knights appear right at the end, nothing really happens.
I mean, you've got, like, some of the murders to build intrigue, I guess, but...
A bit, yeah. Like, you've got, like, the dry drowning, which is really
it's interesting,
important.
At least.
It's important. It's interesting for a bit, and it's briefly important, but then it's, like, dropped very, very quickly. Like, they don't really reference it. Like, basically, after they see... I forget which witch it is, but one of them starts flying away on the broom. As soon as they see that... It's after Shakespeare's... I forget what her role is. It's like a maid or a landlady or something like that. But she gets killed. And then they find out it's a witch, and then neither character is mentioned again for the rest of the story.
Yeah. Yeah, actually. I mean, yeah, that's
There's no mourning them when the whole thing passes. It's just let's all say Expelliarmus and then have a laugh when Queen Elizabeth shows up.
Another day with the TARDIS crew. People dying. Don't worry about that. Just focus on the silly witches and the funny words. Yeah, I can. Yeah,
I think it's going to be like.
Mean.
Well, it's also going to be interesting, like, because I keep mentioning Gridlock next week, but that is a story that, on paper, has, like, it's also a lot of different conversations with various people sitting in cars while nothing is really happening. And it's going to be interesting to compare that, because I feel like that story is purposefully built to be like that, and is actually going to, like, it's going to be interesting stacking those conversations against each other and seeing how they hold up in a flow, because I suspect that it's going to be like the intent is going to be there for telling a story like that, and as a result, it's going to flow a lot better and be a lot better. But again, it's been ages since I've seen Gridlock. That story has its own problems that I'm aware of that we'll come to that in a moment. So for acting, this story has a rating of 7.5. No one is particularly bad in this.
The witches are over the top fun.
Yeah,
so,
you kind of need them to be, though. If
Yeah,
you're going
you
to have
do.
witches in your story and they're not going to be like doing the stereotypical cackle, then what's the point, right?
Yeah, I mean it's like they're not like actually witches. They're just sort of they're almost like a parody, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
It's what humans think of when we think of witches, and it's sort of implanting that into the human sort of timeline with a scientific window dressing, I suppose.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're fine. They're fun. They're over the top and goofy and whatever.
6.8 for effects. It's fine, I guess. The Carrier Knights don't hold up very well. The Spectres, at least.
Yeah, I like the design of the Kharonite Spectre, but yeah, the CG, it's a common thing in the mid to late 2000s of CG not holding up terribly. The special makeup effects for the Kharonite, like the Kharonites we see, are quite good. The guy when he's drowning,
It's a nice
that
effect, yeah.
was actually done pretty well. And it's, I guess, because it's a historical episode, obviously, so most of the effects are sort of practical when it comes to. Actually, no, it's more really set design, but all of that looks convincing enough. Like I can believe relatively that we're in London in 1599. The globe looks, the set for it looks quite good and impressive.
I agree.
There may have been a couple of exterior shots of like the night sky that might have looked a little fake, but there's nothing terrible. Certainly, I think you'll agree. There are bigger problems with this story than the special effects.
Oh, yeah, of course. 6.4 for replay value. It doesn't hold up as well as it might have in 2007.
Yeah,
For a number of reasons.
For a number of reasons. And I think because I have watched it a couple times in the last few weeks in the lead up to this, and yeah, no, there are just certain elements that just haven't aged terribly well. But even beyond that, like the basic elements of the story, like that reviewer pointed out, as you've been pointing out, they just don't fit together. So on repeated viewings, you really start to notice, okay, there's quite a lot of problems here.
Yeah.
It, like as you said, even if you wanted to take away all the problematic elements, and I'm not even sure how you'd do that, but even if you could, the plot itself and the characterizations don't work usually well. They are, I mean, I don't want to say purely surface level, but they're shallow at the least. So
Yeah. Let's get stuck in. I want to highlight the opening of this story because I think it's actually a really solid first few lines. How like it's Wiggins is the name of the suitor that Lilith is. Like the first two lines are like very like on the nose Shakespearean or Elizabethan dialogue. And then when Lilith invites him upstairs, he says, "Oh yes, tonight's the night." I just love that melding of like Elizabethan talk and it's not. I don't want to say modern, but it's probably very realistic to what people actually spoke like or talked like back then. And also the bait and switch of like because the first few moments are very clearly want to make you think, could this be a Shakespearean drama? And then it turns it around and goes, no, this is just set in that time period, but we're not going to like be too on the nose about it. I like that a lot. And then he gets devoured. He gets very quickly devoured by witches in a move that doesn't really come into play. Like, why does Lilith need to take this suitor? Like, what its purpose does he serve in their plan? We don't see his body later on. We don't see them using his bones as like ingredients for their witch's brew or anything like that.
Well, that's an interesting thing because it's very, I think, heavily implied that they basically eat him alive. But if that's the case, then why do they kill other people in other ways? Do they need them for food? Why do they need this guy for food specifically? I get that they're called carrionites, but
it's very clearly designed to be like, this is the cold open that makes you go, oh,
yeah,
and
no,
there's a bit of danger.
This is a classic bit of Doctor Who spectacle that we're looking at.
Yes, and they clearly haven't thought about how it fits into the larger story.
No.
Before we go any further, this episode was the first of a few in Revival Who to be written by Gareth Roberts. He also wrote Unicorn and the Wasp, another episode about a genius writer who excels at everything they do because they happen to be a writer. And also The Lodger and Closing Time, which were the James Corden episodes.
Were they the Cybermen ones?
One of them was.
One of them, yeah.
Yeah. He has stated that he will not write for the show again if Russell T Davies asked him back. I suspect that he wouldn't be asked back in the first place.
No, I can't imagine that.
No, if you don't know, Roberts is a noted transphobe. Has similar views as J.K. Rowling. Doesn't believe that someone can change their biological sex. So not a friend of the podcast.
No. I've read some of his comments on Wikipedia, and even that, I'm like, okay, this is what we're dealing with. That's quite disturbing.
But I bring this up because there's quite a few moments in the story that seem innocuous until you
put it together.
Yes, exactly. Like, so, I mean, the obvious one to point out is the way that Doctor Who chooses to handle their first ever historical story with a companion of color. They highlight it, obviously, because they need to, but the way the Doctor sort of brushes Martha's legitimate concerns aside, and then the episode seems to imply, no, he was right to say that, because Martha at no point throughout the story is ever, like, treated how someone that looks like her would have been treated in 1599. It's pretty ick.
Yeah, it is, for sure. And this is, I want to actually focus on this moment for a minute, because it also sort of feeds into a bigger problem I find with this story, and it's also cropped up in other stories. That's probably, like, in those first few minutes when they're arriving, in London, 1599, that's like the worst manifestation of it in that first few minutes, because that line, as you say, it's ick. It really, really is ick. It's completely ignorant. It's brushing, again, a very serious and real concern that the companion has, and really just kind of glossing over a really serious and important social topic, which is really uncomfortable and stupid. But another issue there is that I think the core, or one of the cores of that element, gets carried on over the next few minutes, because the Doctor succumbs to his very Earth-based nostalgia, because he then goes and says, oh, well, 1599, but things weren't all that different. There's water cooler talk and talk of global warming and all that bullshit. And I can maybe understand, I think, an attempt to say, people in the past weren't as different, as they are today. They're still human. But Jesus, in my opinion, that just demonstrates such a level of historical ignorance. And I'm not a historian, okay? But, like, I mean, I like to think I'm even aware how stupid that comment is. It's like, it's just basically the same as today. It's like when the Doctor in fucking Idiot's Lantern, where he's like, the 50s, what a great period in history.
Yeah.
Never mind that really uncomfortable, terrible ending, and the fact that we've got a character who openly brags about beating his son. No, it's just the 50s, guys. It's a fun little happy time. This is similar. The Doctor is ignoring that important and, let's be pretty honest, the pretty disturbing historical context that Martha rightly points out here. And if that element got really challenged, if Martha even just said to the Doctor, hey, snap out of it, this place is actually really shitty for a number of reasons, maybe that would have worked, but that didn't really happen. The closest we got was later on when they go to the asylum and they see the horrific way that, mentally ill people were treated back then. That kind of challenges that nostalgia, but it's not done in any sustained way. So what you've got is just this very ignorant sort of perspective, I guess, on a historical period that did have a lot of problems. And it's...
And this is an element of... This will get brought up again in Human Nature, and it gets handled so much better in that. Like, it's almost night and day how this...
Yeah, isn't there a whole thing in that story where they, address these issues? I'm sorry, I'm stepping on your toes there.
Characters are actively racist and casually racist towards Martha in that story. Even Nurse Redfern, who is the object of the Doctor's affections in that story, is shown to have been negatively influenced by the teachings and ideals of her time.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is an amazing study of not just historical influence, but also of character. Like Nurse Redfern in that story, and we'll get there in Human Nature, she's a kind person, and the racism she shows towards Martha isn't in any way hostile. It's just like
it's just a part of her culture, the way she's been raised.
She physically can't believe that Martha's studying to be a doctor because in her time that's not what non-white people did, and that's like as far as it goes. And like she's otherwise very, very pleasant towards Martha.
Yeah, and that's a good way to point out, I suppose, the machinations of racism. So obviously, that's clearly different to what we get here, because
exactly when everyone says to Martha, it's fine, and Shakespeare is allowed to use. I'm gonna say, I don't know if the kind of words he uses to describe her are what someone in that time period would have said, but
you can still see,
you can see that Martha's
there's a subtext there, and it's really uncomfortable.
Yeah, and look, some of this stuff with Shakespeare and hitting on Martha and stuff, I don't mind some of it because I like how it falls into the historical context of some of Shakespeare's sonnets having been written for. I'm just looking at it now. There's a mystery person in history which is called the Dark Lady, and I did that in air quotes there.
Right.
It's sonnets 127 to 152 were written about an unknown person, maybe of Mediterranean ancestry. People speculate. Okay. And that's clearly what they're trying to do here. It's a similar thing to Love's Labour's One thing, where they're tying in some of the mystery surrounding Shakespeare into the Doctor Who mythos. I like that stuff. But there was a better way to do it, and a way that
for sure.
A way that didn't actively have Martha be told, well, it's just political correctness gone mad.
Yeah, that fucking line.
Look, that to me is the clearest indication, because the Doctor says it flippantly enough that he could be making fun of people who say that.
Yeah, it was.
But when you put it together with the context of the author,
then you really start to see the bigger picture. And that's what I thought too. I thought for a second, maybe I can try and interpret that in a charitable way, but then I immediately remembered, oh no, I know who wrote this, and there's a context there. That's very unpleasant. And it's just really frustrating that these very, serious issues get just glossed over and sort of mocked, but not in a useful way. Just you don't have to worry about any of this. These aren't real problems.
I mean, even just putting the social social aspect of that aside for one moment, which obviously is a huge part of it.
Yeah.
It's even frustrating as a writer because again, it's the first time that they've had a character like a companion like this, a companion of color in the TARDIS, and they're completely missing opportunities to explore this this stuff. Again, they'll touch on it in Human Nature, but it's like the waste of story potential as well is there, and obviously that's not the most important side of it.
No, but it's still a
yeah,
present issue. Yeah,
present
no,
issue.
I'd agree. There's a lot of like there's a chance for thematic complexity here that the story's just missing because it's in a number of ways like it's whitewashing history. It's like
yeah.
Again, it goes back to what the Doctor says. You know, 1599 in London, it's not all that different today. Like, yes, it is, Doctor. What are you talking about?
Doctor, are you equating doomsday conspiracy theorists to global warming? Is that what you're doing? One thing is real and the other isn't. What are you saying, Doctor? And again, he says that he's clearly joking. But when you piece together everything else about this story that doesn't quite fit,
it becomes quite uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I have no idea if Gareth Roberts believes in global warming or not, but it's saying something that, based on this line and other similar comments throughout the episode, I can't tell anymore.
Yeah, it's you at the very least, like these themes which are important and should be dealt with. They are dealt with, if they're dealt with at all, they're dealt with very flippantly, and it becomes uncomfortable and pointless, and I think just plainly ignorant. It's it's not great. And again, I'm not even against the Doctor having a sort of a strong sense of nostalgia or affection for Earth and humanity to the point that it blinds him to these harsh realities. But if you're going to do that, it needs to be questioned in some way.
Well, yeah, especially because like this could have been an opportunity where it's like the Doctor has only ever traveled with white companions, so he might legitimately just be like stuck in that groove of like the companions I've traveled with have only ever like they've never had to deal with this kind of stuff in the past. So just treating Martha like them, and then throughout the story he learns, okay, no, there's actually a lot of genuinely serious stuff here.
No, for sure.
I'm going to protect Martha more than I otherwise have been, because otherwise there's some pretty serious shit that could happen. But that conception is never challenged by the story.
Yeah. It doesn't. It almost feels like these lines of dialogue and these issues are included as an afterthought, which is really, again, uncomfortable, I think, is the word that describes my feelings towards this. Yeah, it sucks. And and it goes back kind of to what we've both sort of said. The characterizations, and the characters really, they remain quite static. The Doctor doesn't really have much of an impact, or like on the characters themselves. It's more him giving commentary and saying, "Oh, here's this Shakespeare mystery that's cleared up," and the whole thing's a bit of a mess, really. I think.
Yeah. Let's talk about Shakespeare a bit more.
Sure.
I like his portrayal in terms of the performance. Like, it's clearly this sort of semi-cocky, up himself arrogance that has come from years of success.
Go ahead.
It's quite interesting to watch. I do find it interesting how writers, in terms of the historical characters, are always treated as like the smartest people to be living at the time, when that's very clearly not the case. Like, a character can be well spoken and come up with great stories, but can be absolutely rubbish in terms of other elements of their lives, and even in terms of the intelligence side of things. Like, Shakespeare is very clearly not very wise because he's got a wife and is flirting with other people, which I do think is historically accurate. But
they don't criticize that enough. They don't explore it in any particularly, I suppose, interesting way. And you're right. Like, the idea of having these
because like
genius wordsmiths that can, strut about saying, "Yeah, oh, you can't rush a genius, guys," and
well, it's less evident with Dickens, but when we get to Agatha Christie later on, her status of being a mystery writer will somehow lead to her having the skills to be an actual detective and solving an actual mystery, which is very clearly not the case, because all the mysteries that she solves in her novels, she crafts herself.
Yeah.
Being a crime writer, as much as look, despite what the TV show Castle would have you believe, being a mystery writer doesn't give you the inherent skills to solve a police mystery.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
here, like being able to tell stories about star-crossed lovers and like I think it's a bit different because Shakespeare did genuinely invent a lot of the language that we use today and is used back then.
Yeah.
Iconic back then, but like I don't buy the like the whole plot point about weaving the incantation to summon the Carrionites as part of Love's Labour's one, and only Shakespeare can find the words. Like, surely once the globe has been built, the Carrionites can just go to the globe and say the words themselves. Like, there's never any emphasis placed upon. Like, there's never a witching hour that's referred to that means that it has to be done. Like, the only thing that's ever referenced is soon at the hour of woven words, we shall rise again. And that's right at the start. But there's never any reason given as to why it has to be that night and why it has to be, like, disguised as part of this Shakespearean text.
Yeah, I mean, there's that slight, it's not really a justification, but there's that line where Lilith says, oh, it's not quite time yet, but it's happening soon. This is just a rehearsal for the glories to come, but that's not quite enough. It doesn't really justify sort of its place in the narrative, really. And it's annoying because you wouldn't even have to change a lot to make that work. Like, if you had some sort of conceit where it was, oh yeah, no, these Karenites can only, enter, our world or universe or wherever it is that they come from, that it can only happen, or on a certain day, or something. But they don't emphasize that enough. They don't really go into any detail as to why that's happening. And even the Doctor's explanation of why 14, right? What is it? It's related to like stars or something, or different planetary objects, or
I'll look that up now.
Yeah. But either way, like whatever it's referring to, that's not even given a huge justification in the narrative, because it's like, okay, it's related to these things that are related to the Carrionites, but like why? What does that have to do with this wordy science?
It's never explained. Oh, it's the 14 stars of the Rexel planetary configuration. So it's the 14 stars of the constellation that forms the Carrionite homeworld.
But they don't explain why that configuration of that planetary system, why that should, be the trick.
Why that grants them the power of words.
Yeah, it's basically like, this is a thing that's like a thing that's related to this thing, and it doesn't actually mean anything.
Well, maybe it's because maybe it's like that's why the globe is such a good portal for the Carrionites, because it so mimics their homeworld that it's something easy for them to create a bridge out of, like bridging the gap between the globe and the Rexel system. Maybe that's part of the reason why it is, but
that's still not explained very well.
That's only ever like implied.
Yeah. And I mean, and I get that, you wonder, showing versus telling, but as with a lot of Doctor Who, this is one of the cases where you do want to give more information as to how this sort of thing works.
Well, again, especially because I mentioned earlier, so many of these conversations are so similar.
Yeah, actually. You'd think they would have found some place to
Like this
slotted in.
episode's like for being all about the power of words, this episode's word economy is surprisingly bad.
I want to just go back to Shakespeare for a minute.
Yeah, of course.
So I think we've both basically said there may have been potential for some real interesting depth and character growth for Shakespeare, but we don't really get that. We get a little bit of it, I think, in the performance. There's moments when he's I don't know who the guy is who's playing him, but when he's talking to the doctor in particular, you can see a kind of I don't know, like a sorry?
Dean Lennox Kelly.
Dean Lennox Kelly. Well, you can see a kind of like a hidden wisdom behind his eyes, I guess you could say, in those moments.
Yeah.
But that's purely based on the performance, and that's good. That's great that that's happening, but you really need it supported by good writing, and we're not getting it.
Yeah, the closest thing that Shakespeare has to an arc in this story is deciding to write about grief and about his son.
Which even like, and
it's not a story about fatherhood.
No, but I guess it makes sense that the grief thing comes in because the Carrionites explain that his grief is partly what let them into the world, and that's a cool concept, I guess. But again, it just never gets expanded on. It doesn't get. Nothing really comes together. This is not like this story thematically is not about the confrontation of grief. And I'll tell you what, even just talking as we have said about the lost potential of the thematic concerns of this story, you could have had something interesting there about how words and language and stories can be used to help process grief. That's never explored in this story in any meaningful way.
No.
So
like, the story loves to like harp on about the right words said in the right moments being able to change lives, but like it doesn't.
No,
not in this. I'd love to see the Carrionites come back and actually flesh out this concept much better than it is here. Maybe leave Shakespeare out of it. Like don't like because I think as much as that gap, as much as the other connection you can make from witches to words to Shakespeare, as much as that connection is solid, I think it is to the episode's detriment because like at that point all the episode is saying is how good was Shakespeare. When I think there is a better story you can tell about how words affect people, both good and bad, and how, like, maybe even a story about how, like, you know, like the right word in the right context, but also the wrong word in the wrong context can, like, forever splinter dynamics and relationships.
Yeah, like understanding how, language and words, how they shape culture. I think is useful. And admittedly, and I know, like, I'm sure we're going to keep returning to this topic, but thinking about the power of words, you'd reckon that's something that, based on what we know of him, that Gareth Roberts could probably learn from. Yeah, that just becomes even more uncomfortable the more I think about it, if I'm entirely honest.
Yeah, I mean, what used to be a fun little another little like connecting line to draw between witches and words and spells and Harry Potter and Expelliarmus being the word to end it all. What that used like back in the day, that was a fun laugh. Can't have that laugh anymore.
Oh, for sure. No, I mean, I'm forced to say this. I'll take references that didn't age well for 500, Alex.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all we need to say about that. I don't think we need to. We've made our feelings on that pretty clear.
Yeah, I mean, like even if you like just sticking with the J.K. Rowling references specifically, we know how cringe-inducing and uncomfortable that is. Everybody should know how uncomfortable that is nowadays.
I mean, look, there is a timeline where it was a lot worse, and not for this story. Are you aware of the Next Doctor? That story?
Yeah.
So that so the original plan for that for that story, instead of being the next Doctor, it was going to be the original plan for the Christmas special was a fantastical adventure in which J.K. Rowling would appear as herself in a world driven by her own imagination. David Tennant disliked this notion. So thank you, David Tennant. Thanks to you, we didn't get what would be one of the most poorly aged Doctor Who stories in history.
Yeah.
And it's another example of what would have been a revival era Doctor Who story wanking off a writer's imagination. It's amazing, like all these writers writing episodes about how great writers are.
Yeah. Writers aren't that great, are they, Carl?
No, we're not. So this brings us to the end of the episode. We have the nice little Queen Elizabeth tease at the end, which doesn't pay off for another 7 years or so.
Yeah, I have my own issues with the whole Queen Elizabeth thing. That's I think it was one of the more annoying parts of the 50th anniversary special. That just gets to my ongoing frustrations with a lot of Moffat's writing, but that's a whole other topic which we don't have time for today.
Yeah, but even that appearance is driven by a throwaway line in the End of Time Part 1, where because I think that it was never intended to be like a big focus of the 50th, obviously, because by the end of David Tennant's era, I think RTD realized, whoops, that thread needs to be resolved because it's clearly David Tennant's face that is recognized by Queen Elizabeth. So he throws in a line when he's talking to Ood Sigma about what he's done since the Waters of Mars, and he says, "Got married. That was a mistake. Good Queen Bess." And let me tell you, her nickname is no longer. Anyway, so that was the framework for Moffat to follow in that, and like he fulfilled the brief. Like he hit all those points.
Yeah, I guess. Anyway, that's a whole other thing, which again we don't have time for today. But
no,
yes, we get this
like
reference at the end. But
I do like it in concept. This idea of like setting up stuff, like because it's again playing around with time travel, which I quite like.
Yeah, which is fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think and it makes sense. You know, Doctor Who time travel show. In a way, I'm kind of surprised there aren't more little moments like that.
Well,
peppered throughout the show.
I suspect you can't do them too much because a lot of it, like this, isn't stuff that you establish or set up properly. Like, or you don't have a plan going into it, so it's just like setting up your own hurdles to jump later, which as a writer I don't think is very interesting all the time.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
like it's only interesting to do that if you've clearly got a plan going in. So
yeah,
so like the Harold Saxon stuff.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, a lot of singular references that don't actually add up to much. I mean, I guess the best they amount to is maybe potential Big Finish stories. But yes, you're right. I think that if you put references into stuff, you want to try and make them pay off. Yeah. I'd actually be very interested because he actually mentions it here. I will really want to see a story where the Doctor goes to Venus, and what I mean, maybe not literally Venus, because if he did, he'd die. But like if the Doctor went to whatever this Venus planet they keep talking about, because it's referenced in this story, if it's referenced in the Daemons, the Third Doctor talks about it a lot. His martial arts is from Venus. He says a Venusian lullaby a couple of times, so where's that story?
Yeah, it's possible he could survive Venus by putting on his classic orange spacesuit that he wears quite a bit. But yeah, that'd be
maybe there's a subterranean society at
Oh yeah, like
far underneath the atmosphere where people survive.
Maybe.
That'd be interesting. Anyway, So
are we done talking about this one?
I think so. I don't think there's much of that. That review at the beginning actually did cover quite a lot of good ground. It's the story's pretty dumb. At the very least, huge missed potential. Thematically shallow. Ethically really, really uncomfortable, especially in context. And overall, I mean, there are some bits of it that I kind of like the basic concepts of making a science out of words is kind of cool, and the spectacle of it all is kind of fun to watch, I suppose. But
yeah,
it's not great. At the very least, there are far better. I think far better season 3 stories. So
I
yeah,
feel pretty confident in saying this is, if not the worst, then the second worst story of this season.
what do you think would be the worst?
It's either the Lazarus Experiment or
Mm.
42.
Right. Yeah, 42 is the Chibnall one, isn't it?
It is. It's the first Chibnall one.
Right. And also with Lazarus Experiment, I know people sort of mock that story because of the special effects, but are there other like significant issues with the story? It's just been ages since I've seen it.
I don't remember. The most memorable thing about that story is how ridiculously poor the effects are, or at the very least how ambitious they are for the budget that they've got.
Yeah.
Um, which might be a knock in it because it doesn't. It might. I seem to remember there being interesting things to say in that one about immortality and aging, and so we'll find out. But I don't know.
Yeah.
At the very least, that
Um
story's one where if you already aren't a fan of the hokey special effects, it's really gonna turn you off.
yeah, sure. Um without all the charm of, Invasion of the Dinosaurs.
Well, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty satisfied. I think we can call it a
cool.
day with this story.
Yeah, I am going to give this story a 5 out of 10.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I might have given it higher before doing this review, but now that I've talked it through, yeah, I think a 5 is pretty fair. You know,
Uh,
when it's not being bang on average, it's being fairly poorly cobbled together, and when it's not being that, it's being ethically icky. So, yeah,
yeah.
I think a
Actually,
5.
I actually think I'm gonna go down to a 4.
A 4?
Yeah, because like I
Mm,
the ethics drag it down a bit, but as just for the fact that like talking about this, more and more holes in the plot kept popping up, and
yeah, it's
there's very
true.
few really good conversations and scenes that save it. Like the performances are fine overall. Shakespeare's fun to
Yeah,
watch at times. When the Doctor's not being an asshole, he's generally fun to watch.
yeah.
Um,
Carrier Nights are
Martha,
always good, wacky fun, but
yeah, Martha gets moments to shine, like when she gets the Doctor's heart started again, but that's really as far as her contribution goes.
yeah.
So it's not a good Martha episode either. I think it's a 4.
Yeah,
I'm not going to force you to change yours, but that's just where it is for me.
no, that's fair. Um, I think I might stick with the 5 simply because I gave, um, uh, Legend of the Sea Devils a 4, and I remember that frustrating me more than this story does. But this story is still very disappointing. I'll say like a 5, bordering on a 4. Let's say,
Cool.
if that makes sense. Yeah.
All right. Onwards and upwards from here in terms of Martha's tenure on
Hmm.
the show. Looking forward to the gridlock, but before then, next week we're going to be discussing the demons.
Hmm. Should
Till
be
then,
interesting.
until then, I'm Alex,
I'm Fitz.
and if I was any good at improvising Shakespearean dialogue, I'd do something here where it's like uh, join us yon next week, lest thy uh not. I don't know. I'm sorry.
Perfect.